I hate talking about MRR as a way of like, oh, well, that's how we grow our business, when all of it always comes down to the hourly rate. It just always comes, regardless of how you want to bill, whether it's per hour, per seat, per device, whatever it is, it's always attached to a person because we're never really finding that efficiency of like remote management and running scripts and all that stuff that just doesn't exist by and large. It is the service that matters, and it is a person providing that service. So regardless of what you do, you need to find your effective hourly rate in that, noise. And that number needs to support where you want to go. So if that's 150, 200, $300 an hour, that's what it should be, regardless of what your contract says you're charging.
We've spent all year kind of not shitting on MSPs at all. Kind of, and if we are, we're doing it for their benefit. They're saying, hey, you might suck at this, you suck at that. And I knew when we started this series that I wanted to kind of crescendo it with all the reasons MSPs are awesome. And I get to talk to, probably 100, maybe even more different MSPs every year. And as much as part of my job is to never say good job, it's more like, hey, now this, now what's the next thing? What's the next thing? There are so many moments that I get excited for MSPs and I get excited for something they've done. So I compiled a list and I sent it to you guys, of things that really tell us that MSPs and the MSP business model truly is awesome. Ryan or Gary, do you happen to have that in front of you?
Yeah, I
Why
have
don't you
it.
go first?
All right. So I want you to just take a minute with those because you've maybe seen this for 20 minutes max. While I struggle with this, why don't you pick one of those? And Gary, you go first. Pick one that you particularly like and break it down for us.
Yeah, there's a lot here. I mean, I think when I was reading through it, I was reminded about how resilient MSPs are. They just seem to stay in business, right? It's a low barrier of entry. A guy with a laptop can kind of crush his little local service area, but as you get more mature, it seems like it's a fairly strong business. And I think that might be a misconception from some owners thinking it's really hard and, how can they grow and how can they be profitable? But when you compare it to the rest of the SMB space and various business types, it actually shows, all the data shows that, you're in a very strong position on average. So, you know, things like, EBITDA multiples for anyone that's looking to exit. I mean, you can actually sell this type of business.
Hmm.
Lots of businesses out there just kind of wither out and die, and then you see a new sign on the building. That generally doesn't happen with SMB or with MSPs in the SMB space. So I think those are the things that I that are pointing to me as something to value.
Yeah, for sure. That it's a sellable business.
Yep.
I'll have to be the first to admit I don't know a lot about a lot of other businesses, but I don't know, like, how does I don't know, do people buy other businesses? Surely they do, but
Yeah, I was just I think I've hit this point in my life when all of my doctors are retiring. Okay, like my dentist is retiring, my primary care doctor is retiring, and it's interesting watching medical practices turn over because some of them have somebody that just slips right in and takes over that patient load, and then the dentist is just like, no, we're just like shutting the door. And you would think that would be a very sellable business, like somebody else coming into the dentistry industry could just slip into that. So I don't know. I've seen a lot of stuff probably because my banker also works a lot with medical, and so I hear a lot of those stories. Um, and I think that MSPs selling are more consistent than even medical practices because I think it's almost like 50-50 if you're going to sell your medical practice, where in the MSP space, I feel like if you 50% listened to what we talked about this year and did 50% of that stuff. Now, keep in mind, you're at 25% of what we've been talking. You're still probably going to have a sellable business at the end of that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in our household, we have, me as an ex-MSP owner that sold. And then I have my wife. She's a few years younger and she's been doing real estate since she was 19 years old. So, for the past 20 years, it's like 7 day a week grind. There's very little recurring business because people only buy and sell homes every 5 to 10 years. And there's a million plus realtors out there trying to capture their business. And she's kind of at the point in her life where she's kind of looking to transition a little bit. And 3 or 4 years ago, I kind of looked at her business. I said, "Man, can we sell this? What is this?" And I actually found this book. It's only about 100 pages, but what it broke down was like, yeah, you might have, 20, 30, 40 customers that, are loyal to you. And you might be able to find someone that can service those after you're done, but really you might get, one referral per person at best. And you might get 25% of that sale. Um, and then it just kind of goes away. So, you work all your life, 7 days a week, you miss all your family, you know, all your family meetings and dinner and, you're missing soccer and all this stuff. And, to just kind of have to hand it off at best to someone else. Really kind of sucked, It was like, wow, you worked this hard to, build something and, it just kind of goes away. So I reflected on that where, I worked similar hours and, built a team and, someone valued it and came and bought it and, was successful and they've kept most of their clients, which built their business. So, the legacy of that really reigns true for the MSP space, I think.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And those are two fresh, real estate and MSP. It's like, and then you got the doctors. And to kind of think like real estate has its barrier of entry of, you got to take a pretty hard test and be, state certified and whatnot. MSP, it's kind of like if you're good with IT or good with computers and you've got a strong personality, pretty low barriers of entry, compared to like a doctor or a dentist or an attorney. So it's kind of fun to see that you can start this business, not only make a really great living, but also, have some enterprise value and get paid at the end as well. I think that there's some uniqueness to that for sure.
So one thing I found interesting, which I don't know, maybe you guys want to chime in here, but based on kind of ConnectWise reporting about the MSP space and contrasting it versus like some SBA kind of information, they said owners only work 35 to 50 hours a week in the MSP space versus 70 to 90 hours in other spaces.
Mm.
So
What do you guys think about that?
it's interesting you bring that up, Gary. That was the one that I was zooming in on as well. And I think that once an owner stops working in the business and starts working on the business, I think that can happen.
Yeah.
But until that switch is made, I don't think they have any chance of doing that. I know that was a hard lesson for me to learn, being a former MSP owner. Um, and I went to some like leadership training and things along those lines, and it still took a while to sink in. But then once I saw my benefit isn't in resetting a password, my benefit is making a PO process so that we don't lose the hardware that's getting shipped into our organization. Once you start understanding that, then the next step I think is understanding I'm no good to anybody if I'm burnt out. And so I actually have a responsibility to my team to take care of me. That's how I was able to achieve that like 40-hour work week or less.
Yeah, yeah, no, there's no doubt. And, just kind of bringing in kind of our framework to this conversation around this topic. Um, when we're building out our vision system and, thinking about, the impact that we can have and how we can really support owners with this transition from the 90-hour work week
Right.
to something more realistic and working on their business. I mean, what really rang true to me was, that delegation piece, right? Everything that is in your head as an owner is really stuck there. And that really is why you end up working the 90 hours, right? You're just kind of stuck with your knowledge, your ability to change direction without anyone really telling you what's right or wrong. Um, that'll hold you to that 90 hours forever. And when I was building my business, I identified that right away, mostly because I just didn't want to work that hard anymore. And I found like, okay, what's the one thing that I can do today that can, get other people enabled to do the work that I need them to do so I could take it off my plate. And it really just came down to these processes and building those things out, building the policies around that. And then just kind of, letting people go and find those when applicable and execute on them. And, having the proper expectations. I always said, they're going to be about 80 to 85% as good as I am. And not because that's what they're going to be, but my expectations need to be there. That way I can give them some grace in their growth, right? And the vision system really handles that very well. I mean, we have like 180 or so policies that are templated out that you can go in and adjust and frame up for your staff. And I really think that's the powerful way of doing that delegation. So if anyone's kind of stuck in that 90-hour work week and not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, which most people get to, I mean, you're not unique in that way. That's one of the areas that you can kind of lean on to say, okay, I need to get all of this information in my head out onto paper into a system that can be replicated to the rest of the staff.
Yeah, there's no doubt in watching MSPs for the last, 25 years and seeing that swing of, most MSPs were kind of started in that early 2000s, very late 1990s. And so, if these folks were 25, 30 years old when they started, now they're 50, 55, 60. And you watch some of these guys kind of only through time and energy do they start working less. But there's still some of them that, just never quite put it together that I could operationalize or systematize this to get that benefit. And, we all somehow get introduced to that, that Michael Gerber book, E-Myth. And man, I'll tell you what, I remember the first time I read it, it clicked, but I was like, I don't know how to do that. Our business is so unique. How will we ever turn it into a McDonald's or a Walmart? But it's been real fun, especially the vision system kind of bringing that to life. Here's another one that I really thought was interesting was just that 54% of SMBs outsource their IT. Now and it's the MSPs that are doing that work. I mean, I don't get super patriotic and super rah, around much of anything, but that's really cool to think that the folks that, that you guys actually were and now you support, that they're the backbone. Like
Hmm.
they keep things going. I think COVID really highlighted that, for
Oh
me
yeah.
at least, that I had this odd myopic view that, oh, COVID's going to kill the MSP. And I mean,
No.
I was probably the only guy that thought that, but it didn't take long to realize that, oh shit, they are what's bringing this to life.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that we used to have in the office that I really liked was we had our impact in the community on a board. Okay. And so we took how many how many employees, how many kids, how many spouses, then how many businesses. We even went to how many dogs and cats. Like our little company supported, and the impact was amazing. And then we did one year, we did it every year, and we changed it. One was by industry. I had no idea that we supported most of the air tankers and air attack for fire in the state of Montana and that went out in the Northwest. Our little MSP helped keep those planes in the air.
Yeah, hell yeah. I love those exercises where you kind of say, like we do it at Bering McKinley every once in a while, where it's just like, hey, we got 50 clients, and those 50 clients have an average of 10 employees, and then we
Yep.
can just keep tracing it down to, hey, that employee of the MSP's client, their life is better because of what that MSP does, because of what it's really fun to play that game, and it doesn't take long to get to couple thousand, 10,000 people that are really having the quality of their work life impacted, based on it. I also get really excited for SMB or for MSPs that can kind of acknowledge it when they look out in that parking lot. It's like, hey, all those cars that are in your parking lot, you paid for those. Like, every time somebody on your team gets a mortgage and put your company name on there as where they work, that's because of the work that you've been doing. Or Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner, that stuff really gets me excited. And every once in a while I'll have an MSP that kind of gets that. And
Yeah.
I'm really excited because it's a tough job. And if you don't kind of sit back, zoom out and say, people have better lives because of the grind I go through, it
Right.
can be a long road.
Well, and going back to some of the statistics, high client retention, 90 plus percent client retention in our industry. I would agree with that. Um, Over the years, 20 plus years, I was in that MSP space. I can probably count on one hand how many clients we lost, and we ended up with 150 approximately at the end.
Wow.
Um, and so I think that also says something to our industry. When we do a good job, people will stick with us, and they're willing to let us make mistakes too and not just jump ship. Because I think that was always one of my fear. Like, oh my God, if my technician sneezed wrong, they're going to leave me, right? No, they're not. I've seen people stick with other MSPs, and I'm like, you let them get you ransomware 3 times and haven't left yet? Like,
So what do you guys think about this retention and the impact that it could have and where MSPs can get stuck? If you have 90% retention and you get your business to, 50 clients and you're making, $1.5 million, maybe $2 million a year on that, does that cause you to kind of get stuck? You're just like, man, we support these people. They're coming in every day. It's predictable. We're in a good spot. Without having to sell because you've built it up to a certain point, you get out of that rhythm of sales. How do you think that kind of plays against them in that way?
Josh?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. I think how I hear that question is, um, why companies get stuck, and stuck does not have to be a bad thing, but why they have this plateau, and that plateau uh that's born out of comfort. Man, I'm right with you, but lean the fuck into it. Like, lean into the fact that, hey, I've got these 40, 50 clients, we have great retention, I'm making a nice living. If that's what you want, say it, state it, plant the flag, and just say, this is who we are. It's where most of us, however, aren't comfortable saying, I'm really comfortable and I'm okay to be here, and I just have to beat whatever churn might come organically. um once we don't acknowledge that, then we have a foot in both camp. Well, I go to this peer group meeting, or I listen to this person talk, and I should be trying to grow, and you're fighting against this force of saying, I just want to be comfortable, with the force of everyone else says I should be growing. And once we start trying to grow but where our minds and hearts aren't into it, that's that identity crisis that gets exploited. They get exploited by the shitty marketing companies and the shitty cold calling companies and all the things that are kind of like, hey, your heart doesn't have to be in this. Give it a just we'll just plug this in. Where the folks that are like really anchored into, I don't really care about the growth, I just want to be comfortable, they see right through that nonsense. And then the folks that are truly trying to go out and kill it, they also see through that nonsense. But I think there's this identity crisis right in the middle where most of us live, where we're like, I should want to grow, but I kind of don't give a shit. And I live in the middle.
Right.
So, yes, I think it can hurt them, Gary, that comfort of knowing these clients are going to leave me. But it only hurts if you want it to hurt. If you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I do. The interesting thing that I think about when you get to a certain level with your MSP where you're feeling comfortable, Your clients are showing up, they all love you. Um, but you've had them for so long that the inability to raise their prices, right? Oh, they've been with me forever. They were the first ones. So you get this 90% retention, but you know, especially in the last 4 or 5 years with the skyrocketing kind of, CPI, um, you find yourself making less and less profit as you grow or as you kind of move along, right? So it's one of those things where you look at one metric and you're like, man, 90%, look, we're doing great, everyone loves us. And then you look at your gross profit and it's going lower and lower. You're paying your guys more and more each year because you want them to stay, but you don't want to charge your clients more because you want them to stay. And so you can kind of get trapped in this world of, hey, I don't know what to do. And I think that's really where, our service, what we're trying to help people see is, it's multifaceted, right? Like there's what are 17, KPIs around financials really shows them, hey, look, even though you're performing on this side, you're getting killed on this side. So we need to, either grow our way out of it, adjust our pricing, or whatever technique is actually needed at that point.
Yeah, that erosion of margin through being so comfortable and so tied to your clients, and that loyalty you have to them as much as they have to you. Yeah, it's a killer. It's an absolute killer.
I think one of the things that really helped me with that was my master service agreement. And in the master service agreement, we just stated this is how much your stuff is going to go up every year. I think it was 5%. Like
Mhm.
5% per year, just expect that. And then I didn't have to send out that email once a year. It just was like January 1, it just rolls in. Most people don't even notice.
Why do you think because I hear you say it and I know you did it and I know lots of people do it. But for so many people, I might mention that to them or ask them if they're doing that, and it's always this same, like, just, like, grabbing the forehead, moment of, like, "I know I should be doing, I just haven't done it, and I need to." That's probably the most common reaction I get to that, Ryan and Gary. Why do you think that is? Why is it something they've heard for so long, but it's so hard to take that first step?
Yeah, I mean, I could speak from, personal experience here. It's a lot of rooted in, man, I already sold them.
Yeah.
Like they said yes, I need to get past that and just get to the services and, having to resell them on, hey, we're going to give you the same thing, but it's going to cost a little bit more or maybe a lot of bit more. Is scary. It's like, how do I say this in a way where they're going to just say, oh yeah, that makes sense. In one of these metrics that we're looking at, Kaseya came out and said, the seat pricing for the MSP grows at a 7 to 9% per year versus the CPI at around 3 to 4% stated. Now, I'd argue CPI is much higher if you really look at what CPI is made of. Um, but so they're saying the average is 7 to 9% a year. Now, I would question anyone on the call, do you raise your prices 7 to 9% a year?
Mm,
And if you don't, you're not keeping up with the average, which might be shocking to a lot of people.
right, right. Yeah, I've had this on the podcast. We interview, sometimes three, four, five people a week. And this last few weeks, we've just tapped into this population of people that are so, um, how do I say, they're so forward thinking in how they're serving their clients that they're like, price is not even a factor in our world. And the first guy that I hear say it, I'm like, all right, yeah, another guy kind of tooting his own horn. But when I've heard this theme, half a dozen times and heard this, story of how and why, it's like, oh, I can't ignore this. Like, this is really interesting that there's a population of MSPs that are like, per seat, per device. That's the table stakes. Where we make our money is in our consultancy. talked to a guy yesterday and just I really was blown away by him. He's in the Boston area. That our hourly rate is $400 an hour. And it sounds like he's probably in the 10, $12 million range. He said, and he's a very humble guy. And he's like, I'm no different than any other MSP. I just don't care about the MSP stuff anymore. I'm not MSP forward. I'm consulting forward. I'm business forward. And it was really refreshing to hear. And so is he chasing the 6 to 9%? I don't know, but he's taken this other approach to say, my rate, my hourly rate, it doesn't matter anymore because we provide so much value.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean that's the challenge with the MSP today. And I don't think it's an existential threat, but it's very much a what does it look like 5 years from now? How much more? Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, one thing that, owners can do, especially year end, you really one, you need to have your business plan ready for next year. That's step one. But part of that planning, good exercise to go through is just take take your existing client base and say, what if, right? What if we charged $300 a seat or $400 a seat? Because that's what the leading MSPs are doing, right? Just know that they're getting 300, 400, maybe even $500 per seat or per hour, however it breaks down. Um, and just map that out and look at what your business would look like when you charge that much. And what you'll start to find is like, one, you're probably going to be profitable, right? It's probably going to be much more than what you're charging today. Two, you're going to be able to start to pay your people much more than you get to pay them today.
Mhm.
And three, you might find that you're going to lose the right clients
Yep.
when your pricing is in the right way. And what I mean by that is not that you want to lose any clients, but you're going to find that the ones that don't really want to pay for the value that you bring are probably the ones that cost you the most.
Yeah.
It's this direct relationship between it's the loudest voice kind of wins the day. And the loudest voice causes the most problems for the company. They're the least liked company that your techs want to support, right? They call you after hours and, on Christmas to get things done. So I challenge anyone that's listening to this, go through this exercise and say, what if I just charged $300, per seat, per hour, whatever it broke down to? And what would my business look like from a profitability standpoint? How much more can I pay my people to stay profitable? And what clients do I think would leave in that world? And see what your business looks like. And you might find, hey, I've got two-thirds as many clients, but I'm making twice as much profit. And
Yeah.
my people are going to be happier, and I can pay them the bonus that I've been promising them all year long, and all of these good things that can come from it. And just kind of think about that for a little bit. You don't have to take any action, but just think about what's possible. And when you start to think that way, you start to then make decisions in that way. So I think it's a very powerful thing to do.
I'd like to add to what Gary said there. 100% right. Here is an action item that will cost you a little bit of time, and you're going to be surprised at how accurate it is. We did a good, better, best in our client base, and we base this, pick your things like, we used profitability of the client. It was super simple. We had this in ConnectWise. We could do it. And then we just picked our lines and we did good, better, best by market segment, by market vertical. And we just kind of looked at that. And what you're going to find is price. You should be raising your price to drop off exactly what Gary was talking about, to drop off those lower tier clients. And then that'll give you more bandwidth to go after a best client, because best clients require resources. Okay. They require higher end technicians. And if all of that tech time's getting eaten up by those somewhat good clients down at the bottom of that sheet, maybe it's not a bad thing. Do you want to hire more? It comes down to how you want to run your business. Do you want to churn more and make meh, or do you want to have a happier team? Do you want to have more profitability? And honestly have a better well-oiled machine.
We'll be right back with more, but first, here's a quick message from Bering McKinley.
Most MSPs are constantly busy, chasing tickets, projects, and fires. But without structure, it's hard to know if the business is really improving. Vision from Bering McKinley is the system that helps you work on your business, not just in it. It connects leadership strategy with daily execution. Vision aligns people, process, and performance, creating clarity and rhythm from goals to results. And the Vision app brings that structure to life, helping you create policies, track goals, review KPIs, and collaborate with your BMK consultant all in one place. Behind it all, Jetson AI, your assistant inside Vision, helps you find answers, generate insights, and take action faster. With Vision, you gain visibility, accountability, and measurable growth. You're not guessing, you're improving. Vision, Jetson, and the Vision app, your path from strategy to results. Start transforming your business today.
All right, let's get back to the conversation.
I saw this and that concept is one that, we talk about a lot and there's a lot said about it. I think for a lot of MSPs just trying to get through the day or get through the year, that can feel theoretical, that can feel a little academic. Well, if it goes like this, then that happens and you lose these clients, but you can do more. I think sometimes that can feel, just like I said, a little theoretical. I got to actually watch this in real time with this MSP here in the Midwest that we watched them go from about 12 million is probably the first time I really met them. And I think this year, if they're not 85 million, they're 90 million this year. And over this course of 4 years, I got to see them say, oh yeah, our minimum client threshold. I remember when it was 2,500, then it was 5, then it was 10, then it was 20. I don't know what it is. They 20,000 a month was their minimum the last time I heard. And they said that applies not only for new business, that applies for existing business. If we can't see a path or help them find a path to meeting that, then we're letting them go. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like a $10,000 a month contract to most of my clients, that would be a game changer. But to see them just kind of execute on exactly what you guys are saying, it's like, oh yeah, it works, because their headcount does go up, but not at the same rate that it would have if they weren't, kind of selecting out some clients every year. Scary thing to think about, but to actually see it in real time was really exciting.
Yeah, to kind of put this into perspective, you might think about the things that you pay for in your own life. And you might think about the things that are cheap versus the things that are really expensive and how you value those. So simple example is, you gotta, you pay a lot for your home, right? So you invested all this money, you saved it all, you put your down payment on it, and you got a $4,000 or $5,000 a month mortgage. Do you value that payment? I mean, sure, it hurts, but do you value it? Do you look at your home and do you say, hey, I really love my home. I really love the fact that, our kids are at the right school and we love our neighbors and we love the fact that we have stability. You no longer look at that payment and go, man, I just need this cheaper. Otherwise, you would just move, right? You go rent something cheaper, you go move into an apartment, right? The same thing happens when you charge the right price for your clients. They start to value your service more. They stop looking at you as like, oh, he's cheap. Who cares? What, they make mistakes. Yeah, it's no big deal. Versus, no, these guys are professional. They show up on time. They're always available. How do you get there? Well, you got to charge the right amount. You
Yeah.
can't have 50 clients paying you $50 an hour because you need a bunch of people that aren't making a lot of money. So you get, lesser service, given to your clients. So you actually cheapen the service by charging a cheaper price.
Mm.
So the data actually supports a higher price breeds better service. You can have more time with the client. You can think about them. You can do all the things that we say MSPs are supposed to be doing, right? We're supposed to be managing their network. We're supposed to be doing their, quarterly reviews. You can't do this if you're not charging the right amount. You can't do it well. And then what happens is you get kind of are just doing the bare minimum. And, that's why the MSP world has this kind of, mark against it of like, oh, well, they're just IT guys pretending they're managing our network. Right. So think about, when I think about like what price should I charge, it's much more than how much money do I want to make or what are they willing to pay. It really has, lines all the way down where it's, you're going to be able to hire the right people. You're going to spend the right amount of time with the customer. You're not going to have to just go to the next job because, this guy doesn't pay enough. All those things kind of go away when you have the right pricing. And another thing to think about too, it's not hard math, but it's a little bit hard. If you were charging that 7+% increase per year, in 10 years, you've doubled the price of that contract. So just imagine a world where you have 90% retention, you don't bring on any new clients, but you are giving them that normal price increase. Well, in 10 years, you're going to make twice as much money. So it's not nothing. It's a big deal to do this right. You get to grow without having to sell more. And that should be at least enough to think about critically and say, is this a technique that I want to look into and potentially execute for 2026 and beyond?
So on that thread of customer value and even customer lifetime value, one of the stats on why MSPs are so awesome is around that client acquisition cost. And they in the data that I found, they compared it to like getting a new SaaS client. So it's saying $2,000 to $8,000 is the client acquisition cost for a new MSP client. $12,000 to $30,000 is the cost for a new SaaS client. So before we get into that too much, in my mind, I've invented how you get to your client acquisition cost. But Gary or Ryan, will you take a stab at how to actually calculate client acquisition cost?
Gary, this is all you.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, when I'm looking at most MSPs, sub 2 million, they generally do this by brute force, right? They generally do this by, referrals and, hoping that they're providing the right service. And, maybe they do a little bit of marketing, but it's not really effective. So they change their strategy every 30 to 60 days. And it doesn't feel good, but they keep it really low.
Mhm.
Right. So that's where I think these numbers come into play, where it's like they don't spend enough to where their customer acquisition cost does go that high. And
Right.
so therefore they're not actually acquiring new customers, so this is the problem, right? So when we think about kind of the model that we're putting forward, where we're saying, you need to spend money on marketing, you need to spend money on sales, we bundle those two up, and that's in turn our customer acquisition cost. And so you just divide it by the number of customers that you get. So what is your marketing budget? What is your sales budget?
Okay. So is that so? If we said, hey, $2 million MSP, they spent 150,000. No, let's use round numbers. $100,000 on sales and marketing in 2025, and in 2025 they brought on 2 new clients. Would they then be? We have a CAC of $50,000.
That's what that would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. The part I get stuck is it's like, okay, but what if next year, like, is client acquisition cost, is that a 1-year metric? Is it a 5-year metric? Is it like, how do you kind of source that to say a lot of what we did this year won't get a dividend for another 12 to 18 months?
Well, I think the first C is really the critical piece here, the customer part.
Mm-hmm.
How many customers are you getting a year?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that might be 0. So you have infinite cost in that customer base,
Right.
right? Um, so if you have rhythm, if you're allocating correctly, right? You're not just putting all your owner, if it's owner-led sales, maybe that's the only salesperson you have, which is very common and very effective actually. Um, you should be allocating a percentage of the owner's salary
Yep.
up to 100% to sales, right? I think marketing is the piece that most MSPs miss because it's so hard, right? You're dealing with 40,000 other MSPs in the United States. Like, is Google Ads a good space to be? Or is email marketing going to work for you, right? So, oftentimes we find that, there is no marketing. You got your website up and you're trying to do some SEO and, other than that, that's the marketing effort. But if you're running your ship correctly, according to the Bering McKinley model, you're spending, 5 to 10% on sales and marketing, maybe 15 if you're really going after it, and 20 in my opinion, if you're doing it right. Um, but if you're trying to grow, you need to spend on sales and marketing, and it should be a percentage of your total revenue. And it's a monthly metric that you're following because you're spending the money every month, and in turn, you should be onboarding customers monthly.
So let's do some quick math then. So let's think about that $2 million MSP. They follow the BMK model and says 10% to sales and marketing. That's a $200,000 budget to get their client acquisition cost to 5,000. Or they need to bring in 40 clients.
Yeah, that's what that would be. 200 grand. Yep.
Yeah.
So, and really, they're saying 2 to 8,000. I think the two is reasonable. I think it's realistic. And I think that, having that sales salary supported is really the key there. I would love to see, we have some marketing partners that we work with, and I think they're effective, but it's a long game, right? It's just something that you got to pay into. It's not going to work right away. And it's going to be a supporting mechanism to make sure that the world knows you exist. But the sales is really the key, right? Like you need to dedicate someone to sales. And like I said, typically it's going to be the owner. And typically you need to pay that person the right amount to meet that 10% or whatever we're targeting. So
Yeah. As I'm playing this out, it's I think this stat that we're seeing is well sourced and justified. But man, when I think of when I think of some of our clients that spend $100,000 a year and they're primarily marketing focused and not doing a lot of outbound sales work, I'm actually thinking their client acquisition cost is substantially higher than the 2 to 8. So this one I have to question a little bit.
yeah, and it's a
Maybe
trap. I think I work with many other business categories and B2C is one of those where you can just ratchet up that marketing expense. Like one of my buddies comes to mind. He's, pushing 30% every month. And I keep on telling him, look, all your profits are going out the window. Like, and his response is, but that's what we've always spent and that's how we grow. And so it's this balance between do you want to grow or do you want to be profitable, right? In his world. And I think that's the scary part when we talk about MSPs where they don't do any marketing or they don't really allocate to sales. They don't consider sales something because they're just getting referrals and they get one or two, every other month or whatever, and that's just fine for growth. There's really no attention to the sales and marketing budget, so therefore their growth is really dependent on kind of that inattention. Um, and the ones that go after marketing in a disproportionate way really get tired of spending that money. So when you think about what you're going after and what you're trying to do, just take your revenue, multiply it by 10% and allocate accordingly.
yeah,
And I think Bering McKinley is a big fan of the majority going to sales.
yeah.
Um, And I think that's the most effective way personally. But just know like you should be spending and don't overspend.
There you go. There you go. Gary, pick us another one off the list of why MSPs are awesome.
Yeah, I think the recurring stability is really kind of the one that is the most obvious to people. It's like, we've been indoctrinated on this MRR, model, and the stability around that. And to me, it's totally accurate, right? Like it really does. One, it's a when you're as an owner, you just feel better when you have recurring business, right? When hey, no matter what, I've got 10 contracts that are paying $10,000. I'm going to make $100,000 next month. I now can make wise decisions around where my company's going. And so the MRR and the stability around that really makes this business make sense to most people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know Ryan, I'm a huge fan of your model that you had at your MSP where you were very project and hourly forward and MR was secondary. You made that work. And I think a lot of it was your personality type, just how your brain works. So you made that work.
Yep.
Were there moments in your journey, where you were like, boy, that would feel really nice to have that just kind of guaranteed revenue? Or were you not really willing to trade what you needed and wanted out of the business for that perceived stability?
So I think the key there is perceived stability.
Mm,
Okay. Because I did the math many times and I'm like, something, I would probably be making less on that reoccurring than I am on the hourly plus the projects. And if you figured it out per seat, it almost worked out the same most months. Um, and there came a point where you're so far down the road, it would be easier just to start a new company than try to change the company that you already built. And I hit that about 7 years in, and I was like, yeah, I'm just not going to do that. We're just going to keep this is working. We're going to keep going, because I was just building this little IT company in Missoula, Montana. Like, I didn't know, right? Like, and back then, back in the day, when dinosaurs were churning the Commodore 64s and we were in business, right? Like, the the reoccurring was a thing, but not as big as it became. I think that it was also easier for me to manage the company without that hourly reoccurring, just price per seat. And people were like, what are you talking about, Ryan? It's not hard. Well, it is kind of harder because, like, you've got to keep really close track of how much time you're spending per contract versus spend all the time you want with each client. We're getting paid for it. It's all good. We're making money regardless. I used to say, like, the recipe was good. As long as you followed the recipe, the cake will come out good. Like, the financials will come out. I think MSPs today have a lot harder challenge to that. And honestly, my hat's off to every one of them.
yeah. Ryan, you're from the state with cattle ranchers, yes?
Yep, we sure are.
And you've clearly heard the phrase all hat and no cattle.
Yeah.
Have you ever actually met one of those guys who's all hat and no cattle?
Yes.
Okay. And so when I look at a lot of MSPs, it's all hat and no cattle, meaning it's all revenue and no profit. And
Oh, yes.
yeah, and you
So
kind of said,
I
I don't want to be the no all hat, no cattle guy.
no, I'm like, I remember sitting in a room with a $60 million MSP. They were big. Okay.
Yeah.
They were part of this conglomerate and this was their division and all this. And here I am, this little $2 million MSP. And I was crushing them with profitability. Like, my little $2 million MSP dropped way more to the bottom line than they did. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what are you guys doing? And so this was a reoccurring meeting that we had. And so, but it was like 6 months later that I saw them again. And the one thing I told them is, I'm like, why aren't you guys charging for shipping? This was a tip I got from you, Josh, back in the day.
Right.
And they're like, well, we don't pay for it. I'm like, so? And the next month, or the next time I saw them, they had dropped, I don't know, 6 grand to the bottom line in shipping. And
Right.
I'm like, well, it's better than nothing, right?
Right.
Like it's a start. And so yes, I definitely think there are a lot of all hat, no cattle out there.
Yeah, it's a shame, because there's that perceived security. It's obviously very stability. It's saying, less than a 1% monthly swing, which is real nice.
Yeah.
And I haven't found the words yet. I haven't found the the way to express that I love the recurring, but that's now it's like that's the starting line. Like go chase your security, or your stability. But now the real work is to get in that project and hourly work, put so much focus into that. That's where you're going to get the great margins. That's where
Yes.
my new friend in Massachusetts said it. It's like, we've got that part covered. It's profitable enough. Our money is in our, all the kind of high level business analytic type of conversations we have at $400 an hour.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think you can have this and that, but yeah, that early chasing of that stability can be can be a real problem if that's where you think the story ends.
What Ryan said there, where he said, managing the projects and managing the company, and you're almost forced to manage it in a way that's more accurate, which breeds more profit when when you're focused on that hourly work. Right. And I think that's the fallacy behind, MSPs and the MRR is like, no, we got 30 grand a month coming in, like all you can eat, do whatever you want. And that's where the profit just dies. Um, I hate I hate talking about MRR as a way of like, oh, well, that's how we grow our business. When all of it always comes down to the hourly rate. It just always regardless of how you want to bill, whether it's per hour, per seat, per device, whatever it is, it's always attached to a person because we're never really finding that efficiency of like remote management and running scripts and all that stuff. That just doesn't exist by and large. It is the service that matters, and it is a person providing that service. And so regardless of what you do, you need to find your effective hourly rate in that, noise. And that number needs to support where you want to go. So if that's 150, 200, $300 an hour, that's what it should be regardless of what your contract says you're charging. And when you can get to that point and you look at whatever contracts you have, and maybe there's many different kinds that you're providing, you just find what you are as an hourly rate, and that's how your business is performing. And most companies that do MRR only and all you can eat don't look at that number. They just look at the revenue and they go, oh, we're doing great. They don't break down the agreement gross profit and the effective hourly rate in a way where they can understand, are they actually doing great? And to Ryan's point, a $60 million MSP can actually lose money. And we've
Oh
all
yeah.
seen this. And it doesn't make any sense. And they put all the pressure on their techs to say, you need to be more efficient. You need to work faster. We need to hire more people that know more things and all this stuff. And it's just like you get lost in it because you're leading with this fixed bid contract and this MRR metric. So I just think it's like, from a stability standpoint, it's one way of tricking yourself into thinking that everything's good. But when you really break it all down to that effective hourly rate and you say, no, we charge $200 an hour, no matter if we're doing projects or, help break fix or help desk or server support or whatever the thing is, that's how much we charge. And when we don't charge that, then we need to make a decision. And most likely, going back to the previous part of the conversation, you're not charging enough. That's what it comes down to. You're not going to put more pressure on the tech to be more efficient and to do things. You're just going to drive them crazy, and you're not going to pay them enough, and they're going to quit because they're overworked and underpaid. You need to make sure your pricing is right. And that's the easiest answer and the hardest thing to do, especially if you've been in business for a while and you are afraid of raising prices and you're afraid of talking to your customers in the strategic way. Um, so that's really on the owner to really make sure that they're identifying. And you start today. You got to look at every contract. You got to look at your pricing.
That's right. That's right. Well, gang, with that, I am so, um, I feel really, I really love my life around being able to work with so many small business owners, so many MSPs, watching them on their journey. And I love, busting their chops and telling them they're doing something wrong. But at the end of the day, hey, these guys put food on my table. I'm excited for their growth and their wins. And as scary as I think the next few years could be for many of them, I haven't met an MSP yet that isn't ready to, rise to the challenge of where this market is going. So with that, thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for showing up here live today. If you're watching us on YouTube, thank you so much for joining the channel, joining the conversation. Give us a like, a share, a subscribe. It means a lot to us. And as always, give any of us a call anytime. We obviously love talking about this stuff. And have a great end of your year. And Ryan and Gary, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks,
Yeah,
John.
thanks, guys.
Thanks, Gary.
All right, bye, boys. Bye, everyone.